What would you do if the whole town laughed at the $2 you'd just spent, and the thing you'd bought was a rusted-shut railway supply car that hadn't been opened since before you were born? Wren Halloway, 19 years old, freshly cast out of her uncle's boarding house in Cheyenne with $14 and a leather tool roll to her name. This wasn't a question. It was Tuesday morning, the 3rd of April, 1897, and the auctioneer's gavel had just come down on a 42-foot iron-wheeled boxcar sitting dead on a siding 6 miles east of a nowhere town called Ledger Pass, Wyoming. $2. Everyone laughed. The car had been locked since 1859, they said, and no locksmith west of Omaha had ever cracked it. But Wren had spent 11 years watching her father shape iron with his hands, and she knew a thing about locks that the men in that room did not. Inside that car, welded shut by a paymaster no one remembered, was a secret that had been waiting 38 years to be found, a secret that would rewrite the story of Ledger Pass, restore a debt that had ruined 9 families, and quietly, without fanfare, make a 19-year-old orphan the most spoken of woman in 3 counties. Settle in, pour yourself something warm, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. To understand what Wren Halloway did with that supply car, you have to understand her hands first, because her hands were the only inheritance her father had managed to leave her before the fever took him in the spring of 1893. Silas Halloway had been a blacksmith and a farrier in the small settlement of Fort Kearney, Nebraska, and before that, in his younger years, he had spent 8 seasons apprenticing under a Swedish locksmith in St. Louis who taught him that iron, unlike men, always told the truth if you were patient enough to listen. Silas passed that lesson to his only daughter the way other fathers passed pocket watches and pieces of land. He taught her the difference between a warded lock and a lever lock. He taught her how to file a blank key by candlelight, how to read the wear patterns on a strike plate, how to feel for the exact fraction of an inch where a tumbler wanted to fall. By the time Wren was 12, she could rebuild a broken padlock in under 20 minutes and shoe a percheron mare without her father's hand on the hoof knife. By 15, she was earning her own coin repairing lantern hasps and safe hinges for the merchants along Kearney's Main Street. Never much, sometimes 40 cents, sometimes a whole silver dollar, but always her own. The sentimental thing he gave her was small. On her 13th birthday, Silas pressed into her palm a slim iron tool no longer than a man's little finger, hand-forged from a broken buggy spring, its tip filed to a delicate hook and its handle wrapped in oiled leather stitched with wax thread. He called it a listener. It was a pick, but he never used that word around her, because he said the word made honest work sound like thieving. A listener doesn't take anything, Wren, he told her. A listener just asks the lock to say what it's already trying to say. She carried it in a soft calfskin sheath sewn inside the waistband of her work skirt, and she carried it everywhere. She still carried it the morning her father died, cold-handed and quiet, of a spring pneumonia that swept through Fort Kearney and took 19 souls in 11 days. She was 16 years old. There was $47.50 in the tin box under the anvil, a mortgage of $312 owed on the smithy, and one living relative in the whole of the Union, her father's half-brother Ambrose Halloway, a cattle broker in Cheyenne who had never once written a letter home. Ambrose came on the train. He did not embrace her. He counted the tools in the smithy, wrote down each item in a small ledger bound in oxblood leather, and told her, on the platform back to Wyoming, that she was not to speak of her father's trade to his wife or to the boarders in his house, because such work was, in his phrase, the labor of persons of no consequence. That was the first sentence Wren ever heard her uncle speak. She would hear a great many more like it in the 3 years that followed. Ambrose Halloway's boarding house sat on a wide street in Cheyenne where the sidewalks were made of proper lumber and the men who walked them wore watch chains of thin gold. There were 9 rooms let out to bachelor clerks and rail agents at $3.50 a week, and Wren was given the small room off the pantry, 6 feet by 9, one window facing the coal shed, in exchange for what her uncle described as the making up of the household's ordinary requirements. In practical terms, this meant she rose at 4, laid 9 fires, drew water from a pump that froze 11 weeks of the year, boiled sheets on Mondays, ironed shirts on Tuesdays, kneaded bread every morning of her life, and served 2 full meals a day to men who did not learn her name. Her Aunt Lavinia, a thin woman with a permanent draft of grievance around her mouth, addressed her as the girl. Ambrose, when he addressed her at all, addressed her as you. She did not weep. She had wept once, on the train from Kearney, into the collar of a shirt that still smelled faintly of her father's forge, and she had decided somewhere between Sydney and Pine Bluffs that she had used up her allotment. Instead she kept the listener in her waistband and, in the evenings, when the boarders had gone to their rooms and Lavinia had gone to her prayers, she practiced. She practiced on the pantry door, on the coal shed padlock, on the little brass mechanism of her aunt's tea caddy, always relocking what she opened, always leaving no trace. The listener grew warm and dark from the oil of her fingers. Then, on the last Sunday of March 1897, 3 years and 1 month after she had arrived, her uncle called her into the small office off the parlor and closed the door. He did not offer her a chair. He opened the oxblood ledger. He turned it around so she could read her own name at the top of a column. Below her name he had written, in a copperplate hand, every meal she had eaten in his house, every candle burned in her room, every yard of muslin used for her aprons, every dose of camphor spent on her one winter cough. At the bottom of the column, in red ink, he had drawn a line and written a figure, $412.60. This, he said, is what you have cost this household, Wren, over 3 years and 1 month. Against it we may set the value of your ordinary labor, which, at the going rate for a girl of your station, I have calculated at $398.60. He turned a page. The difference is $14, which the household will forgive, as a gesture. My wife feels you are old enough now to seek your situation elsewhere. The 9 o'clock stage on Tuesday goes east to Ledger Pass. I have taken the liberty of purchasing your fare. You will be given, at the door, a sum of $14 in coin, which represents the closing of your account with this family. He closed the ledger. He did not look up. Wren stood very still for the span of perhaps 6 heartbeats. Then she said, "Thank you, Uncle Ambrose," in a voice that was neither warm nor cold, and she walked out of the office and up the back stairs and packed. Into a canvas grip she put 2 calico work dresses, 1 wool skirt, 3 chemises, 1 pair of stout boots, 1 Sunday shawl, her father's small daguerreotype in its tin frame, a folded piece of paper on which was written the recipe for her mother's yeast starter, her leather tool roll containing 11 hand-forged instruments, and, at the very bottom, wrapped in a strip of red flannel, the listener. At the door on Tuesday morning Lavinia handed her 14 silver dollars in a small drawstring bag of unbleached linen. Neither of them spoke. The stage was already waiting. What would you have said, if you had stood in that hallway? Let us know in the comments what you think you would have carried out that door, and what you would have left behind. The stage from Cheyenne to Ledger Pass runs east and a little north through country that gets flatter and more honest with every mile. First there are wheat fields, then there is short grass, then there is only sage and the long bones of dry creek beds, and then, past a place called Two Widows Crossing, there is a stretch of 41 miles where nothing lives but pronghorn and the wind. Wren rode with 3 other passengers, a whiskey drummer, a Methodist circuit rider, and a woman in a black bonnet who did not lift her veil once between the 2 towns. The drummer offered Wren a boiled sweet at midday. She thanked him and did not take it. She had 11 silver dollars and a handful of small coin knotted in a corner of her handkerchief now, having spent $3 on a hot supper and a bed at a way station the night before, and she had already decided that until she knew what she was walking into she would not spend another cent she did not have to. Ledger Pass, when the stage rolled into it at 3:30 on the afternoon of the 2nd of April, 1897, was not a town so much as a habit that 78 people had gotten into. There was one main street of packed earth 220 yards long, a Union Pacific water tower, a false-fronted hotel called the Iron Kettle, a livery, a mercantile, a shuttered assay office, and a small railroad yard containing 3 sidings, on the northernmost of which sat the object that would change Wren Halloway's life. She saw it as the stage rounded the water tower. She would remember, later, that she did not know yet what she was looking at, only that her eye caught on it and would not release. It was a boxcar, but not the kind that rode the main line. It was an old ironclad supply car of the sort the Union Pacific had run during construction days back in the late 50s, 42 feet long, riveted plate over hardwood frame, 2 heavy sliding doors on the near side, both doors closed, both fitted with padlocks the size of a man's fist, and both padlocks so red with rust they looked less like locks than like organs grown out of the iron. The car sat on wheels that had not turned in decades. Grass grew up between the ties beneath it. On the side, in paint gone from black to a soft charcoal ghost, someone had once stenciled the letters UP Pay for, 1859. Wren asked the driver about it as he handed her grip down. He spat and said, "That's Winslow's car. Been sitting there since before the war. Auction on it tomorrow morning at 11, 7th time they've tried. Won't nobody bid. Locks are welded shut with rust, and the last 2 fellas who tried to torch it open got run off by Mr. Corliss down at the bank, who says the car and the land under it both belong to the railroad and the railroad don't want it damaged. So the railroad puts it up for sale every 3 years, and every 3 years nobody buys, and there it sits. Why does the railroad want to sell a car that can't be opened? Wren asked. The driver laughed. The railroad don't want to pay taxes on it. County been assessing it as improved property for 38 years. Cheaper to sell it for $1 than keep paying the tax. He tipped his hat and climbed back onto the box. As the stage rattled away, an old man who had been sitting on a nail keg outside the mercantile, a lean, weathered man of perhaps 70, with a white beard trimmed close and eyes the color of river ice, looked up from the piece of pine he was whittling and said, in a voice pitched exactly to reach her and no one else, "Iron remembers, girl. Rust is only iron trying to tell you where it's been." Then he went back to his whittling as though he had said nothing at all. Wren took a room at the Iron Kettle for 40 cents a night, ate a bowl of bean soup for $10, and slept badly. In the morning she washed her face in a tin basin, braided her hair, put on her wool skirt, and walked down to the rail yard an hour before the auction. She walked around the car twice. She laid her palm flat against the iron and felt, through the cold, the faint drum of a hollow space. She crouched by the northern door and looked at the padlock. It was a Miller & Sons cast iron model, 6 inches tall, of a pattern her father had once shown her in a catalogue and called, with a small smile, an honest lock, meaning any honest man with an hour could open it. The rust was not welded. The rust was only rust. It was thick, it was ugly, it was 38 years old, and it had convinced a whole town of something that was not true. At 11 o'clock a man named Prosper Vane, agent for the Union Pacific, stood on an upturned crate in front of the car with a paper in his hand. 22 people had gathered, most for the amusement. Vane called for opening bids on Lot 4, 1 supply car, contents unknown, sold as is, no warranty as to condition or accessibility, minimum bid $1. A man in the crowd, heavyset, in a bottle green frock coat, gold chain across his vest, raised a hand and offered $1. Wren, later, would learn that this man was Ellery Corliss, president of the Ledger Pass Bank and Trust, and that he had bid on the car at every one of the previous 6 auctions in exactly the same way, always for exactly $1, and that on each previous occasion the bid had been the only one and had been withdrawn at the last moment on a technicality of his own devising, because Corliss did not want the car sold. He wanted it left where it was until, someday, he could have it hauled away and quietly disassembled on land he owned. Wren, who did not know any of this yet but who saw the way Corliss's eyes flicked toward her when she stepped forward, said in a clear voice, $2. The crowd laughed. Corliss's mouth thinned. He raised his hand as if to bid again, and then, for a reason Wren would not understand for another 11 days, he lowered it. Perhaps he thought a 19-year-old girl with a canvas grip could not open what he had failed to prevent from being opened for 38 years. Perhaps he calculated that letting her fail publicly would be more useful than winning the car himself. Prosper Vane called for further bids, got none, and brought down a whittled mallet on the crate. "Sold," he said, "to the young lady in the grey shawl, for $2 silver, 1 supply car, UP pay for, 1859, and may God have mercy on her patience." The crowd laughed again. Wren paid her $2, took her paper of sale, folded it into the pocket of her skirt beside the drawstring bag now containing $9 silver and some change, and walked back to the Iron Kettle to change into her work clothes. She began at 2 in the afternoon and she did not stop, except to drink water and eat a heel of bread, until nearly 9 at night. She did not attack the padlocks. That would have been the mistake of a stranger. She attacked the rust. From her tool roll she took a small stiff brass brush, a bottle of neatsfoot oil, a vial of vinegar decanted from the Iron Kettle's kitchen for 2 cents, a soft rag, and a hand-forged pin punch no thicker than a knitting needle. She wet the north padlock with vinegar and let it stand. She wet the south padlock the same. She brushed. She oiled. She brushed again. Small red flakes came away in her palm like the scales of some ancient fish. Her hands blackened. Her knuckles split at the first joints and she bound them with strips torn from a rag and kept working. A few townspeople came to watch. A boy of about 10 asked if she was a witch. A woman in a widow's cap named Mrs. Etta Lund brought her a tin cup of coffee at 4 o'clock and a wedge of cornbread at 6, set them on the rail beside her, and walked away without asking a question. The old whittling man from the mercantile came at dusk, stood 20 feet off, and watched for a long while without speaking. Then he said, again in that pitched just for her voice, "Your daddy taught you well, girl," which was strange, because Wren had told no one in Ledger Pass who her father had been. She only nodded, and he walked away. By full dark she had cleaned the north padlock down to bare metal. She sat cross-legged on a folded sack in the dirt beside the car, took from her waistband the calfskin sheath, drew out the listener, and set the tip of it into the keyway. She closed her eyes, because her father had taught her that the eyes lie to the hands. For 11 minutes there was nothing. Then, on the 12th minute, she felt the first tumbler give, a small, dry, private click, like a bird settling on a branch inside a wall. She breathed out. Second tumbler. Third. The fourth was stubborn and she worked it for another 6 minutes. On the 5th tumbler the shackle sprang free of the body with a soft, cold sound, and the padlock, 38 years and 1 month after it had last been locked, opened in her hand. She sat for a moment. She did not smile. She reached up, gripped the great iron handle of the sliding door, and pulled. The door did not move. Rust in the track, warp in the frame, 38 years of prairie wind pressing it home. She braced her boots on a tie, took the handle in both hands, and pulled again. Something inside the door groaned like a living thing. She pulled a third time and the door slid, 6 inches at first, then a foot, then, all at once, 3 feet, and stopped. A draught of air came out that was cold and dry and smelled of pine tar, of old paper, of oil that had long since forgotten it was oil, and, faintly, of something Wren did not at first recognize but which was, she would understand later, the smell of gold, because gold, in quantity, has a smell, close and cool and slightly sweet, like a coin held under the tongue. She lifted her lantern. And what she saw inside that car had been waiting for her, or for someone very like her, since the 14th of October, 1859. What do you think she saw first? Take a moment before we go on, and let us know in the comments what you'd have looked for. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of hidden ledgers and quiet courage. The car was a paymaster's car. Wren did not know that phrase yet, but the room told her, item by item, what it was. Along the left-hand wall, bolted to the deck, stood a heavy oak desk with a green baize writing surface and a hinged brass lamp. Above the desk, screwed to the iron plating, hung a framed map of the Union Pacific's proposed western route, the eastern portion inked in solid black, the western portion still, as of 1859, only a hopeful dotted line. Along the right-hand wall stood 3 iron-strapped chests of the sort that travelled with army paymasters, each about 3 feet long and 2 feet high, each closed with a Miller and Sons padlock of the same pattern as the ones on the door, 3 more locks that the listener would, in time, be asked to open. Between the chests and the desk, on a small cot bolted to the floor, someone had laid out, decades ago, a folded grey wool blanket, a leather satchel, a tin coffee cup, and a Bible bound in black calf. On top of the Bible, weighted by a small brass compass, was a sealed envelope. Wren climbed into the car. Her lantern threw the shadow of her braid across the far wall in a slow arc as she moved. She did not go to the chests first. She went to the desk, because the desk was where her father would have gone. You learn a man from his desk, Silas had told her once, more than from his grave. The desk drawer was not locked. Inside were, a paymaster's ledger bound in brown buckram, containing the names, ranks, and wages owed to 71 men of a Union Pacific survey crew who had been working the Lodgepole Creek grade in the autumn of 1859. A stack of 38 unopened letters bound with red tape, each addressed in the same neat hand to persons in Iowa, Ohio, Missouri, and the territory of Nebraska, a fountain pen of black hard rubber, a bottle of ink long since dried to a black cake, and a small tintype. Photograph, no larger than a playing card, of a young woman with dark hair and a solemn mouth, holding on her lap a boy of perhaps 3 years old. On the back of the tintype was written, in pencil, Adeline and Thomas, Council Bluffs, May 1858. Wren set the tintype down. She went to the cot. She took up the envelope from beneath the compass and turned it over. Across the face of it, in the same neat hand that had addressed the letters, was written, "To whoever finds this car, and opens it honestly." She broke the seal. She sat down on the edge of the cot. She held the lantern close, and by its light she read what a man named Josiah Winslow, paymaster of the Union Pacific Railroad's Second Western Survey, had written on the night of the 14th of October, 1859, 38 years and 6 months before the hand of Wren Halloway had ever touched the iron of his car. Friend, if you are reading this, you have done what I could not. You have opened the door I locked from the inside, and you have done it, I hope, by patience and skill rather than by torch or powder, for those men would find nothing but ruin, and this car has too much good to be ruined. My name is Josiah Winslow, and I have been paymaster to the Second Western Survey since the spring of 1857. In the chests along the wall of this car is the payroll of 71 men, in gold coin, silver coin, and Union banknotes, totaling $11,482.16, which sum was delivered to me at Omaha on the 2nd of October last, and which I was instructed to carry to the survey camp at Lodgepole Creek and there to disperse. I did not disperse it. I will tell you why. On the 9th of October, in Council Bluffs, I received a letter from my sister-in-law informing me that my wife, Adeline, and my son, Thomas, whose likeness lies on the desk you have surely already opened, had died of cholera in the 3rd week of September, both of them, within 9 hours of one another, and had been buried in a single grave on the hillside above our house. I received this letter 3 weeks after their burial. I had written to Adeline every Sunday of the preceding month. She had received none of my letters, and I had received none of hers, and this failure was, my sister-in-law wrote, a matter of the post and not of any coldness between us. I read the letter in the freight office at Council Bluffs. I did not weep. I got onto the train with the payroll chests, and I rode west, and somewhere between Grand Island and Kearney I understood that I could not carry this money to Lodgepole Creek, because if I met the 71 men of the survey I would have to speak to them, and if I spoke I would not be a paymaster any longer, I would be a broken man, and a broken man cannot be trusted with $11,000 in gold. So when the train stopped for water at a siding 6 miles east of a whistle stop then called Bitter Draw, and now, I am told, called Ledger Pass, I told the engineer that I had received orders to hold the pay car on the siding for further instructions. I paid the engineer $4 from my own purse to say nothing, and he was, I believe, an honest man, and I believe he said nothing. I disembarked the pay car. I locked the chests. I locked the doors from the inside, by a device of my own contriving which any patient locksmith may reverse. And I sat down at this desk to write this letter, and 38 letters more, one to each surveyor whose wages I hold, addressed in the hand of a man who could not bear, on that October evening, to carry the money to their tents and see them alive when his own wife and son were not. I have arranged with a friend in Omaha that a small pension, drawn from my private means, be paid to the families of these men in my stead. I do not know if he has kept his word. I fear he has not. What I have done is a crime under the laws of the railroad and of the United States. What I could not do was a crime under the laws of my own heart. I have chosen the smaller crime, and I have locked it in with me, and when I have finished this letter I will lie down on this cot with my Bible and my compass and the tintype of my wife and my boy, and I will let the winter that is coming decide what becomes of me. Friend, whoever you are, if you have opened this car by skill and not by violence, then you are the sort of person to whom I would trust what I could not carry. Take the money. Pay the 71 men, or their widows, or their children, or their grandchildren, as many as you can find. The ledger contains their names and their last known homes. What remains after that is yours, freely and without condition, on one requirement only, use it well. Make this place live again. See that the men are paid. Do not spend $1 of it on vengeance, and do not spend $1 of it on shame. I am sorry to have left this weight for you. I am not sorry to have set it down. Josiah Winslow, Paymaster, Union Pacific Railroad, 2nd Western Survey, the 14th of October, 1859. Beneath the signature, in a hand that had grown, by the last line, less steady, he had written one further sentence. Adeline, if by some grace this letter finds you first, forgive me for the letters I did not send. Wren sat on the cot for a long time. She did not weep. She had, as before, used up her allotment. But she folded the letter with great care, and she put it inside her father's tintype frame behind Silas's picture so that it would be safe. Then she took up the lantern and went to the first of the iron-strapped chests, and she knelt down, and she took the listener from her waistband, and she began, patiently, to ask the lock what it had been trying to say for 38 years. By dawn on the 4th of April she had opened all 3 chests. She counted the money twice. It came, to the penny, to $11,482.16, in gold eagles, silver dollars, and Union banknotes so crisp from their cold vault of iron that they crackled when she unfolded them. She counted the names in the ledger. 71. She read each one aloud in the empty car, because it seemed to her that a name unsaid for 38 years was owed at least the courtesy of being spoken. Then she closed the doors, replaced the padlocks, cleaned but not locked, and walked into Ledger Pass to find the old whittling man. His name, she learned, was Alden Roeder. He had been 14 years old in the autumn of 1859, a water boy on the 2nd Western Survey out of Lodgepole Creek, and his father, a chainman named Peter Roeder, was the 7th name in Josiah Winslow's ledger, owed $142.80 in back wages, which the family had never seen. Peter Roeder had died in the winter of 1861, believing to the last that the paymaster had absconded with the crew's wages, and Alden Roeder had grown up hating the name Winslow with the patient hatred of a boy who has watched his mother sell a wedding ring for flour. Wren gave him the letter to read on the porch of the mercantile. He read it twice. When he was done, he set it down on his knee and looked out at the flat prairie for a long while and said, very quietly, "Iron remembers, girl. I told you." Then, and only then, did he weep, which was the first time he had wept, he told her later, since the spring of 1863. Together, over the next 4 months, they found 63 of the 71 families. Some were still in Nebraska. Some had gone to Oregon. 2 had gone to California and 1, remarkably, had gone home to County Cork. Wren wrote every letter herself, in a careful copperplate she had learned from a boarder's discarded penmanship book in Cheyenne. She paid every debt in full, with 38 years of simple interest at 4% added on her own initiative, which brought the total disbursement to $9,611.44. 8 families she could not find, and the money owed them she placed in a trust at a bank in Omaha, not at Corliss's bank in Ledger Pass, to be held for 70 years against any claimant. That left, of Josiah Winslow's $11,482.16, a sum of $1,870.72. She did not keep it for herself. She bought the supply car outright from the Union Pacific for another $3, the paperwork of ownership having been, until then, rather vague, and had it towed on log rollers a quarter-mile off the siding onto a half-acre of ground she purchased from the town for $80. She hired the carpenter, a soft-spoken man named Halloran who had, without being asked, repaired the sagging step of the iron kettle the morning she took her room, to build around and over the car a proper shop of milled pine, with a stone forge on the north end and a locksmith's bench on the south. She hired the smith, a Norwegian named Bergstrom, to help her set the anvil. She hired Mrs. Etta Lund, who had brought her cornbread on the first afternoon, to keep the books and to cook a midday meal for whoever worked in the shop. She named the place, in small black letters on a pine board above the door, the pay for, Halloway and Roeder, locks, iron and honest work. Alden Roeder, at 70 years of age, became her partner and her apprentice in the same breath, which he said was the finest arrangement a man could ask for. Ellery Corliss came to see her in the second week of June. He came in the bottle-green frock coat, with the gold chain across his vest, and he stood in the doorway of the shop with his hat in his hands, which is not a posture bankers ordinarily assume. He had learned, by then, what was in the car, because the whole territory had learned. The Omaha Bee had run the story on the 22nd of May under the headline "A Debt Paid After 38 Years, and the story had been picked up by the Chicago papers and even, in a small paragraph, by the New York Herald. It had come out, in the telling, that Corliss's father, an earlier Corliss, had been the friend in Omaha to whom Josiah Winslow had entrusted the pensions of the survey families, and that the elder Corliss had not paid a cent of them, but had used Winslow's private funds to found the very bank his son now sat behind. This was not a matter for a court, 38 years on and both principals dead, but it was a matter for the opinion of every farmer and cattleman between Cheyenne and Omaha, and the opinion of those men, expressed in the quiet form of the withdrawal of deposits, was decisive. By the end of July the Ledger Pass Bank and Trust had failed. Corliss himself moved to Denver, where, Wren later heard, he took a position as a clerk in a firm run by a distant cousin of his wife. He did not raise his voice at her, when he came to the shop that day in June. He said, "Miss Halloway, I understand you have been fortunate." Wren, who was at her bench filing a blank for a widow's kitchen safe, did not look up. She said, "I have been careful, Mr. Corliss. It is a different thing." He stood in the doorway a moment longer. Then he put his hat on, and he left, and she never spoke to him again. Ambrose Halloway wrote her a letter in August. She recognized the copperplate on the envelope before she opened it. The letter, when she unfolded it, was 3 pages long, and it began by reminding her of the affection with which she had been received into his household in the spring of 1894, and it ended by proposing that, in view of her recent good fortune, she might see her way to reimbursing the household for the balance of $412.60 which had, on their earlier accounting, been forgiven as a gesture, plus reasonable interest, which he had calculated at $63.19. Wren read the letter once. She took a clean sheet of paper. She wrote, in her copperplate, "Uncle Ambrose. Enclosed please find 14 silver dollars, being the exact sum with which I was provided at your door on the 30th of March, 1897. Consider our account, as you once put it, closed. Wren Halloway. She sent the coin by registered mail. She never heard from him again. By the spring of 1898, 1 year and 1 month after the auction, ledger pass had grown from 78 souls to 211. The shuttered assay office had reopened. The iron kettle had added a second story. A schoolhouse had gone up on the east end of the main street, funded in part by a small anonymous gift of $142.80, which was, coincidentally, the exact sum once owed to a chainman named Peter Roeder. Halloran the carpenter was building a house for his wife on a lot behind the shop. Bergstrom the smith had sent for his brother in Trondheim. Mrs. Etterlund had taken a room above the shop and had, for the first time since her husband's death in 1889, begun to sing again in the mornings while she made the coffee ritual, for cups poured at 6:30, one for herself, one for Alden Roeder, one for Wren, and one set on the corner of the bench where Wren kept, in a small wooden box beside her tools, the black calf Bible and the tintype of Adeline and Thomas Winslow, in a place of honor, so that, as she said to Alden, once, the paymaster and his family might have a seat at the table they had earned. On the evening of the 2nd of April, 1898, 1 year to the day after the auction, Wren locked the shop at dusk and walked out onto the half-acre of ground she now owned. The prairie was going pink and then blue and then the deep gray of the hour before stars. She sat down on the step of the old supply car, which was now the back room of her shop, and from her waistband she took the listener, and from the small wooden box on the bench inside she took, wrapped in a strip of red flannel, the small brass compass that had lain on Josiah Winslow's Bible for 38 years. She held them, one in each hand. The listener was warm and dark with the oil of her fingers, and shaped like a question. Her father had given it to her and said, "A listener doesn't take anything. A listener just asks the lock to say what it's already trying to say." The compass was cool, and its needle wavered north, and Josiah Winslow had left it as a marker on top of a book, on top of a story, on top of a debt. Her father had given her the means to open the door. The stranger had given her the reason to walk through it. She was 19 years old, 20 in 6 weeks, and she had been cast out of her uncle's house with $14 silver in a linen bag, and she had spent 2 of them on a supply car nobody in 3 counties could open, and inside that car she had found $11,482.16 and 71 names, and 1 letter, and 1 grief that had been waiting 38 years for someone patient enough to sit down and hear it. She sat on the step until the first star showed. Then she stood up, brushed the dust from her skirt, put the listener back in its sheath and the compass back in its flannel, and went inside to bank the forge for the night. Thank you for staying with us to the end of this story of patience, quiet courage, and the debts that iron remembers when men forget. If you were moved by Wren Halloway's journey, by the $2, the 38 years, the 71 names read aloud in an empty car at dawn, please give this video a like, and share it with someone who has ever been handed a small, exact sum and told that their account was closed. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell, so you won't miss the next tale. Next week we travel south into the Arizona territory to the story of a girl who inherited a dry well no one would drink from, and what she found 17 feet down in the dark. Until then, we'd like to leave you with a question, and we hope you'll answer it in the comments. What has someone once handed you and called worthless? A house, a trade, a book, a piece of ground, a piece of advice, that turned out, when you were patient enough with it, to be the making of your life? Tell us. We read every one. Be well. And remember, iron remembers. Rust is only iron trying to tell you where it's been.